Good morning and welcome. We are excited for this work session today. Today is Monday, April 13th, 2026, and we are here in the Commissioners Conference Room at our Administrative Services meeting at 200 West Oak for a work session with our Sheriff's Department and other staff on a possible camping and parking ordinance. I am Larimer County Commissioner Jody Shattuck McNally, Chair of the Board of County Commissioners. I am joined by my colleagues, Commissioner John Cafalis and Commissioner Kristen Stevens. We also have our County Manager, Lorinda Volker, here at the table, and the room is full of lots of folks. So I will introduce our wonderful Larimer County Sheriff. We also have our County Assistant Deputy County Attorney, sorry, it's Monday. This is my third meeting today. Just wanted to welcome you both, but I will let you kind of lead this, and I know you two are going to open while we're here today, and then we'll introduce those who we need to as we move along. So thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you, Madam Chair, County Commissioners, County Manager. So today we're here, talking about the camping and parking ordinance, which we really don't have in Larimer County, and let's talk a little bit about why we are even coming to you here today. So it used to be, state law has changed in recent past, that it used to give law enforcement authority to address some of these needs. So some of the needs include, for example, an abandoned vehicle in front of your house, parked on the roadway, but perhaps it's in the process of being remodeled and restored, hasn't been registered, hasn't been running, and definitions for abandoned used to say that if it wasn't registered at the state, and we could address it. Well, that kind of changed a few years back, and so now if we go and find a vehicle, for example, that is license was registered in 2022 was the last time, may not be operable, may have more than one vehicle on the property, and we go up to your house and we say, hey, is this your car? And you go, yep, it's my car, even though it's on the public right-of-way and you can't run, it's not considered abandoned by current law. This ordinance would change that, so they'd have to at least register it and keep it running to leave it parked on public right-of-ways. Another issue we get is long-term folks putting RVs in different areas in public right-of-way. So perhaps just on the easement of their property, it's still their property, but there is a county easement for utilities and for water, and they basically store the vehicles there for long-term purposes. Create some conflict that we've had several complaints within our community about these kind of issues. And the third scenario deals with folks who are living in their vehicles. And while we don't want to criminalize homelessness, and we want to have an ability to provide a legal context for contacting folks. So right now, if we find somebody and who appears to be living in their vehicles, we have no legal jurisdiction to even begin a conversation with them without consent. There are so many resources in our community, and that's one of the things we found when I worked at Fort Collins, is just that ability to have that conversation. But to begin the conversation, it's either, Commissioner, I see you living in your vehicle. Can we talk to you for a minute? And if you say no, then we are done in the water, because it's only based on consent. This actually gives us the ability to have some of those conversations, and it's like, what are your resources? What's going on? There is an ordinance that allows us to contact you. Can I introduce to you some of the resources available in our community and figure out what's going on? Not to be an overbearing and, again, criminalizing the homelessness, but to make sure we have the ability to have that conversation within our community and point you in the right direction, so that if there's something that you need, we can help. Also, it's interesting, my daughter is one of them, but the overlander culture has become a big thing. And so there's all kinds of apps and websites out there that say, you don't need to go pay for campgrounds. You can go camp in these areas. And that's very, very true. And we are so fortunate to live in Larimer County that dispersed camping is truly a thing. On Forest Service land, if you get a quarter mile off a road, you can pretty much camp anywhere you want on U.S. Forest Service land. This culture was not designed, or we were not ready for, I'm going to pull off to the side of the road in a wide spot on Highway 34 or on Highway 14 and set up camp for 3 days and enjoy that. this point, we don't have any mechanism of even beginning that conversation with folks about what their plans are and why they are where they're at. So this would give us that ability. The ability is not, the intent, and I can talk more about how we're going to do this after our county attorney speaks to what we're going to do, but the intent is not to be draconian in this. The intent is to give us an avenue to have some kind of conversations with the owners of the vehicles who are under repair, folks who may be living in their vehicles, and help point them in the right directions within our community. So I will pause there and let our county attorney take over.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you, Commissioners. Frank Haug from the County Attorney's Office. As the Sheriff mentioned, we are authorized under state law to adopt ordinances to regulate a variety of things. One of those things is the use of county property, which includes right-of-ways. Under the statutory definitions, right-of-way is defined not just as the roadway, like the developed paved part of the roadway, but actually the entire width of where the road is, where the county's property is. So it includes sort of the borrow ditches and the pull-offs and all of the things along there. And we have authority to regulate that, and to regulate vehicles, and to regulate camping to some extent. Other jurisdictions around us, Loveland, Fort Collins, have regulations about this, and the general concept of those regulations is that if you're in a particular area for more than 48 or 72 hours, you can't stay there, or you are subject to being moved off of that area, right, on public property. The ordinance that we would be adopting addresses essentially three particular things. One of them is camping on public property without permitted camping. Obviously, in campgrounds and areas like that, you would still be able to camp. But if you're camping in the right-of-way, or if you're camping on county-owned land, it would give the sheriff's office a mechanism at least to contact those folks and to have that conversation. It also prohibits parking or abandoning vehicles on public property, which includes the right-of-way. And it has sort of a fairly expansive definition of what is an abandoned vehicle. That can include an unregistered vehicle. It could also include vehicles that are inoperable, vehicles that are not really sort of roadworthy, or are being left there for extended periods of time. It also prohibits putting up other temporary structures like tents or structures like that in public property. And just so the board is aware, the way that we've sort of drafted this ordinance was to capture all of those different things. You could adopt all of that or some of it or none of it. That's up to you. I tried to, in drafting it, be fairly expansive in my definition of abandoned vehicles and things like that, just so that we were able to capture it. As the sheriff mentioned, this does not create a criminal offense. It creates a civil infraction process. And so the sheriff does that in some other circumstances. They do that. But essentially what would happen is they would be allowed to issue a ticket, and then that would carry with it the potential for a financial penalty. I think it would be $100 for the first offense, $200 for the second, $300 for the third. But it would be enforced through the county court as a civil penalty process. It wouldn't be a criminal offense. So that's kind of the gist of how it would operate. The way that it's drafted would bring us into a more consistent line with how the communities around us are handling these sort of circumstances. And so I think with that, I'll just pause and see if there's any other questions that I can answer.
Questions, colleagues?
Or if the sheriff wants to.
Oh, Sheriff,
go
did you
on.
want to add some?
No, I think I preambled, and I appreciate the opportunity. I have a feeling most of your questions are probably going to touch on some of the points about why, or not just why, but how this is going to be enforced, how people are going to impact it, what the North Star, the guiding principle, the leader's intent is from the sheriff's office, should you pass this ordinance. So I think I'll pause and speak directly to your questions rather than trying to answer them broadly.
Thanks. Commissioner Kafas, I saw your hand was raised.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues. I appreciate your attention to this matter. It's been a bit of a journey. Just wanted to quickly provide a tiny bit of context, and then I have a couple of questions, but I'll just do one at this time. I seem to recall it was August, maybe of 2024, when we had a meeting because prior to that, we had been receiving complaints, concerns from folks who lived in residential parts of the unincorporated, parts of the county, like on the west side of Fort Collins, and also along the commercial corridor, I don't know, the Super 8 motel and some really complicated situations out there. So I think that's some of the genesis of this discussion, and I think it was in August of maybe 2 years ago or a year and a half ago that we convened and we talked about this, and we wanted to make sure that it aligned with the process that our Office of Housing Stability was involved in, regarding developing I think it's the regional homelessness study. And so we wanted to make sure that whatever we might consider was in alignment with those efforts. And certainly to your point, Sheriff, the intent is not to, quote, criminalize folks who are experiencing homelessness, but the intent, I think, is to provide law enforcement folks with more tools. And it seems to align with some of the other ordinances that occur in the places that you mentioned, Frank. So I wanted to provide that context. And I guess one question I would offer, and thank you for hearing me out a tiny bit there. How about, so one of the situations that we've talked about for quite a while, and I think provides some of the basis for these deliberations, you have a situation on a small side street that's in the public right-of-way, and there's been an RV there for going on 3 years now that doesn't have proper tags, that did have people living in the RV up until maybe last year, and there's other vehicles. You kind of alluded to this, Sheriff. How would this ordinance apply in that situation to provide you with tools? Because as we've discussed, it's adjacent to a residence. I mean, you know all this stuff, but I wanted to get it out in the open. How might this ordinance, if we pass it, help you all to engage with the owners of that RV that could be impacting other properties in the neighborhood and all of that? Thank you, sir.
Okay. And I think, County Attorney Hauger, either one, I know he's not the county attorney, but Assistant Deputy County Attorney Howard I can take that. So in that specific instance, and this ordinance was drafted partly with that in mind, as one of the major complaints that we had received and we've been talking about for over a year now. The vehicle is parked in the public right-of-way. It's off the street, but it's still in the right-of-way and not on the person's individual property. Now, nothing in this ordinance prevents you from storing your camper, or your RV, or any other vehicle that you have on your private property that you own. This vehicle in question is actually on the public right-of-way. It hasn't been licensed for a while, and so this ordinance directly speaks to that. So even if we knock on the door and say, is this your vehicle? And they say yes, in the past, it was technically not abandoned, and we couldn't do anything with that. However, with this definition, well, it's not registered in the state of Colorado or any other state that's current, and it gives us a tool and a mechanism to have a conversation with the homeowner at that point to come into compliance with this, so it's moved off the public right-of-way.
Should we just do a quick follow-up?
Yeah, and then I'd love,
And then of course,
I'd love to let
yeah,
Commissioner
yeah.
Stevens thanks.
No, thank you. And maybe this is a question for Frank. And that is, so then it gets to the how. So in a situation where that's been occurring for almost the last 3 years, if this becomes local law, then that will allow you to engage with the homeowner. And then what happens? They'll be informed, they get a notice, they have 24 hours, then they have 72 hours. Could you, or maybe Frank, could you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, what would happen essentially is law enforcement would be allowed to contact then those people who have that vehicle. The definition of the way we abandoned, or we defined abandoned vehicle refers to vehicles that are unregistered, vehicles that appear deserted, vehicles that are inoperable. And so the reality is that it's not always one particular thing. There's sort of a variety of circumstances that come up. But so we have that, would capture it through that definition of abandoned vehicle. Law enforcement would then be authorized to contact the owner. If they can't find the owner, they can post essentially on the vehicle something saying that this, you need to move this or get it dealt with or whatever. And if it's not dealt with, then they could issue this citation. Eventually, what could happen is if they can't get it resolved, they'd be able to remove the offending stuff eventually. But it would be, I mean, it's not like it's going to happen overnight. You still have to apply due process, and you have to give everybody an opportunity to respond and everything.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure. Commissioner Stevens.
Yeah, thank you. So with the fines, do we have discretion on what those fines are?
Yes, it's capped under the ordinance statute, the way that, so the most we could do would be the $300, but then the way that it's written, it essentially says within that, you can, they would have discretion on how much of the fine to issue. It's not discretionary in that we can't do more than $300.
Sure. But it's discretionary whether we have a fine, whether we issue the fine or just maybe is there a warning that has to happen before a fine is issued? Or it can,
Yeah, they have to post notice on the vehicle, and then they have to leave it there and then come back.
yeah, my only concern, and there again, I think that some tool is valuable, because I think we've had a lot of neighbors and businesses have issues. There's public health issues, honestly, with where human waste is going and things like that. So I do see the need. And I'm glad that it's a civil penalty and definitely don't want to criminalize it. But like, I'm thinking if you're living in your vehicle, $100 is a lot of money. So like what is that? I mean, are there processes for people to get, help with that or waive that, or what does some of that look like? Or is there a point at which those, like, there's other fees tacked onto those fines? In other words, people can find themselves in a bit of a hole in these kind of situations where all of a sudden I owe $500 to the county government, and there's no way for me to pay that because I'm living in my car or RV. I mean, can you just describe a little bit of how we deal with people who are maybe indigent and don't have the means to pay this? And are there tools in the court system that can help folks kind of get out of those situations? And this may be beyond, and we can, if this is a question we need answered later. That's my only fear, is that, right? I mean, when people feel some desperation, and you do if you live in a vehicle, then that some of that can really compound that. So maybe.
Well, from a legal standpoint, from a procedural standpoint, you would get a citation if you were violating this ordinance. You would get a citation that would be written in as a summons into the county court, and then it's like we do this in other sort of traffic type circumstances where they have court on certain days, and you get a ticket, and you get a return date to go on that day. The court has some discretion on waiving penalties. The sheriff has some discretion on how to write those penalties. There's sort of different court, you would end up essentially paying the fees to the court and then coming back and working through that if you had to. So that's sort of the procedural answer. The answer is yes, there is some discretion on whether to issue that financial penalty or not. But the ultimate outcome would be you'd get a citation that would be written into county court, much like any other sort of parking ticket or traffic ticket.
What does it look like to issue a ticket to someone who doesn't have an address? I mean, right? I mean, if I'm living in my car, I don't have presumably maybe they have a family member or somebody who they give an address. I don't know. I'm just,
No,
just
that's
curious.
a great question. So oftentimes they usually have an ID of some kind of driver's license, and we would use that, or we just have a conversation and ask them. I mean, if we get the whole goal is to get voluntary compliance, right? So if you are living in your car and you're camped on the white spot on Highway 34 in Waltonia Canyon, and we contact you, it's a conversation, right? What are your situations? What are your circumstances? Is there a mechanism that we can utilize to assist with resources that already exist in Larimer County? What's going on? And sometimes we see children living in the vehicles with their parents, right? And so how can we help that situation? education, right? Here, there is an ordinance that you can't stay here for more than 24 hours. Can I get you some of those resources? If the answer is nope, we got it covered, it's like, okay, well then the expectation is that you're not here tomorrow when I come by or when my deputy comes by. And so if we gain voluntary compliance, we're done. If we don't gain voluntary compliance, again, it's an ongoing iterative process. And we talk a lot about in our field about what is the commander's or the leader's intent. The law says black and white, here's what this is, but here's how, there's multiple ways of enforcing this. So this is the leader's intent for this ordinance, is that we are looking to provide, we want it to be amicably resolved for all parties, the public and as well as the individual that we're speaking with, and hopefully gain voluntary compliance. If that doesn't happen, then yes, the first step would beyond voluntary compliance is the issuance of the citation, and we would use an ID. I mean, we're going to probably contact you, and when we contact you, we're going to do what law enforcement does. We're going to ask you who you are and what your date of birth is to make sure there aren't other outstanding issues that we need to address as well. And so we'll have an idea of an address from that kind of contact.
And then what is you said it's comparable to, Loveland and Fort Collins have similar, rules on the books. Are they 48 hours? Are they 24 hours? Are they 72 hours? Do we know what they are?
It's a little bit it's generally 24 or 48 hours. In Loveland, they have one regulation that talks about vehicles that are designed for sleeping, which is like an RV. That one is, you can't be there for 72 hours. But then if you look at their definition of abandoned vehicle, the definition of abandoned vehicle talks about a 24-hour period. So that's sort of just like a car, like instead of a thing that you're like an RV that you're camping in. So it depends a little bit on how you define what kind of vehicle you're talking about. For hours, and again, this is all at the stage of you all could sort of do it how you wanted, 24, 48, 72. Those are the usual, when I've looked around the state, those are the numbers that we're usually talking about. For ours, the way it's drafted right now, I think we put 24 hours, but that's up for discussion.
Thanks. And then just the only other thing that I want to ask, and we can get to this later, but maybe Aaliyah or somebody can talk about how we would message this to, there again, I don't know that all the people that are kind of sleeping in their cars, and that's the piece that I guess I'm most concerned about, versus the, if you're leaving your abandoned, unlicensed vehicle in the right of way, come on. Put it on your driveway. But how do we message this out, especially if people aren't maybe they're not getting resources from some of our either human services department or Murphy Center or some of those, or maybe they know how to get that message out. And is there any sort of pre-contact before we would adopt an ordinance like this that would be advisable so that folks kind of understand that we're more in line with what the cities are, unless, that we have an ordinance now.
So, and I'm going to jump in and take this. So it's a little bit, and you're right, of all the things that are in this ordinance, I too am most concerned about the part that you spoke about, right? You leave your unregistered vehicle outside in front of your house for 5 years, we can deal with that. You leave your RV parked on the side of the road in the public right of way, that's a different discussion then. I have no other resources. I do have an ask, as I hear this conversation, but I'll get to that here in the end as far as what the fines look like when we get to that point. I mean, so part of it is the public comment and the ability to do this. Part of it is social media. We can put it out there on social media and do news stories about it. But the question is, does that really get to the folks who are going to be impacted by the implementation of this ordinance? And probably not. And again, that's kind of where I feel the leader's intent happens. Because quite honestly, we could find somebody who's from Pennsylvania parked out on Highway 34 in a horrible situation or whatever in August, and they're never going to get this message. So the first contact's going to be that contact with my deputies, and that compassion and that I expect from them, and that communication from them, the education that I expect from them. And I do not expect, again, a draconian, overbearing, but it's right? It's education, it's education before enforcement, and multiple contacts with education, barring, the person we contact always has a vote in how things go, right? And so they could escalate things to a point where there's other things become criminal. We never want that. But that's how the word is going to get out is through that contact, probably with our deputies on first and foremost.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
I have a few questions. And some of them have been asked already, but I'm going to build off of them, not to be repetitive, but I need some clarification for what I would like. I'm glad you talked about some of that discretion as the first contact from the deputy. Being education, and you're not just coming to just, slam a fine. So a couple of questions off of that. If you do make that contact and you have that ability to do a little more to kind of have that conversation, because before you couldn't, is to get them resources or have them aware of the ordinance and that it could result in a fine, et cetera. When you have that contact, would it be where you would come back in 24 hours or a couple of days, or is that kind of discretionary about how long you would give? That's my first question. I have a few questions too, like my colleagues had, so.
No, that's perfect. So, that's part of that discretion. Quite honestly, it depends upon, am I on tomorrow, right? This could be my Friday of my shift if I'm the Area 6 or Area 7 deputy, and I use them because in this situation, we may find that. It could be Area 1, right? So the East Mulberry corridor as well. But if it's my Friday, I'm not coming back tomorrow. We may pass that information along. That's not typical, the kind of information we pass in our briefings, like, hey, can somebody go check on ABC 123 to see if it's still parked at Air Park and wherever. So I may hit that as part of my to-do list on my Monday, which may be 3 days from now, 4 days from now, maybe 5 days from now. Or I may and even if it's not my Friday, because our Fridays are not everybody else's Friday. If I'm coming back, my intent is to come back tomorrow. Call volume may not allow us to come back tomorrow. So the ordinance says that they have up to 24 hours at a minimum. Now, the reality of the situation is going to be dependent upon who contacts them, when they contact them, where they contact them, and what the other public safety needs of the community are when we contact them again.
Thank you, that's what I figured, but I just wanted to ask, and yeah, a lot of us are used to not having normal Fridays like other folks. It's so I understand that tremendously. So let's say you contact someone and they wish to comply, they're living in their car, but maybe they don't have resources for gas or need a jump start. Is that something, they want to move or try to go to a different area? What kind of resources, helping jump battery, or because maybe they're using it to charge things? I'm curious about that. What is that guideline, that range, that
Right.
recommendation?
No, it's a great question. And while I can't say every situation where there's a battery, the deputy's going to jump their car, every situation where they don't have gas money, right? But again, that's having that, being aware of the resources, like you mentioned, Aaliyah, and the continuum of care in our community, what that looks like, being familiar with the Murphy Center, Seth Forwood at the Fort Collins Rescue Mission, and having that education and that knowledge, we can help. I'm also very aware of the compassion and the kindness and the humanness of the deputies. We have multiple instances where deputies have bought groceries and diapers and put gas in cars on their own dime and never being asked it, and we only know about it because somebody happens to review their body cam, because they don't tell other people about it, because that's the kind of people that we employ. But can I say that you have to put gas in somebody's car? I'm not going to tell them that, but that's kind of the pathway we're on anyway, right?
Yeah, and I'm just curious because I figured, I've seen that, I've heard of that, I've heard lots of stories about that. I figured, but I just wanted to see what the guidance was like to maybe be cautious or not. Most of the deputies I met have huge hearts, so I know some of these things mean a lot to them. So let's say they move and go to from zone 1 to zone 2. Is there going to be a system where you're like, this car has been 5 times and moving around and, I mean, over a year, I'm not saying immediately, but like over several months or something, what does that look like?
So this is where the joy of being a county commissioner comes into play, because the county attorney and I, we had this sidebar conversation. There is no what we would call a block face requirement in this ordinance. So there is no minimum requirement of how far somebody has to go, or maximum, to be compliant. So if you move from Waltonia Canyon on Highway 34 to the Whispering Springs wide spot on Highway 34, is that acceptable or not acceptable? And we can help craft some of that. And if you're at, and I'm gonna mess my geography up here in the city, but if you're at Cherry and College, then we would park there. But if you're at Cherry and College and you get contacted by a deputy and you go to Vine and College, is that far enough? What is the expectations? That is not written into this ordinance. That's kind of left to the discretion of what the deputy is. It's like, well, you're not far enough away. Well, okay, what is far enough away? This is where the joy of being the legislative body for the county gets to play into it. Because you can set that standard.
The reason I ask is I know that was a certain standard where you move your car into our parking lot and you've got to move it 50 feet from where, some parking lots, you have to move it 50 feet from where you're at. So I just had sparked my thought about that. Then my next question is, it's interesting you bring up Waltonia because, going up to hike this weekend and I go up early and I notice who's parking there in the morning. There's one that was, van that obviously someone was living out of for weeks. It was there in the same spot right along the river. There's certain cars that have been in the same spot, like 3 or 4 of them right next to each other. Right on, if you sort of over the line, you'd hit one of them. They're right up against the road. I think you know which ones I'm talking about. And I'm always afraid someone's going to slide into that and have, an accident. So my first question to that is they've been there for a year or 2, haven't moved, obviously, or disrepair. For my first question, does that apply? Would this be something you would use to help move those vehicles from, to me, it's a safety thing. And then how does code compliance with the county planning community development come in? Is that a code compliance thing? And how does that all interplay with if that's their home and those vehicles are in the right of way along a busy highway?
So the first 2 questions, I'm certain of the answer. The third, I'm not, but I'm going to take a stab at it. Okay. So yes, this is a situation where this ordinance would help. Yes, this is a place where we would utilize that if enacted. Third, this is my third guess, is like this is not a realm of code compliances because it's not dealing with specifically private property. It's a public right-of-way, and code, to my understanding, doesn't deal with public right-of-ways. Okay, I'm going to look at that. I could be a county attorney next. No, not really.
So maybe the county attorney, there might be some overlap.
Well, there often is overlap, and the general idea is that there's different sort of statutory mechanisms and authorizations under the law that allow us to regulate different things. This particular ordinance is modeled off of Title 30 and the board's ability to regulate traffic within the county, and also Title 42, which is the traffic statute, which allows us to deal with vehicles. Code compliance is a separate thing that deals with private property. So if a person were to be, on the county right-of-way with one of these vehicles and then move it on to private property, you might still have an issue, but then it wouldn't be the sheriff's office dealing with it. It would be the code enforcement people at the county level.
Well, I'm curious because I think some of these cars are, I literally think they're partially in public right-of-way and partially on the private property. So I'm just, curious about that. But case specific, but I think when you get along highways and tight things up on the county roads, or even in some of the others, you have situations where cars have been left abandoned and kind of just there. And so I'm curious, but just something for thought, just curious about that as I was driving back down. And, you can't your mind never stops as a commissioner. You think about things all along as you drive up and down, so.
And Commissioner, if I may,
Yeah.
if any part of it's on the public right-of-way, it becomes the purview of the sheriff's office. And you
Okay.
can't split the difference by saying half here and half there.
Awesome, thank you. Commissioner Gafos, I see your hand.
Commissioner, if I may, if any part of it's on the public right-of-way, it becomes the purview of the sheriff's office. And you can't split the difference by saying half here and half there. Awesome, thank you. Commissioner Gafos, I see your hand.
Thank you. I have a few additional questions.
Absolutely.
The first is building on Commissioner Stevens regarding tickets and citations and people who are experiencing homelessness, who don't have the resources. What assurances that we have that if they go through the various iterations, that they're not going to wind up in jail? Because if you can't pay the ticket and you can't show up for the hearing, does that ultimately mean that a warrant for that person's arrest will be issued? How do we address that?
Well, I mean, as I had said earlier, similar to the other types of things like this, traffic infractions, if you don't show up for court, then the court can issue a warrant for you. They can issue a bench warrant for it. They don't, our court often has sort of amnesty days where you can go and deal with those things. But to be clear, it's not a criminal penalty, but if you don't show up for court, then that's an issue for the court to deal with.
Well, and there are many reasons, contributing factors, why someone may not be able to pay their ticket or show up for court. And that's where this gets a little bit complicated. I think that's something we need to give some more thought to. I'm not sure what the answer is, but I also know that we need to have some kind of a framework so you folks have some tools to deal with this. I'd just like to continue a little bit here. Regarding the 24-hour provision that's currently in the ordinance, the draft ordinance, what is that based on? You said, Frank, it's 24 to 48. Is there any kind of best practice regarding giving people 48 hours versus 24 hours? And then they have, I think, 72 hours to take some kind of action.
My answer is I don't have any policy reasons behind what I did. I essentially looked at other ordinances from the cities and from the other jurisdictions in the state. The state statute, when you look at the state statute, it says 72 hours, that you need to give 72 hours before you can tow it and before you can remove the vehicle. So, to answer your question, I use those numbers because it was what was in some of the other ordinances. I don't have a position on the policy.
So potentially we could change the 24 to 48 hours.
Correct.
Yeah. Just perhaps two more questions, and the next question being, could you speak to, I think it's more of a Frank question, or how we have attempted, the county has attempted to be transparent in this process, this deliberative process, working with our Office of Housing Stability, having this work session, not jumping into the deep end of the pool, but trying to engage folks. Could you speak to that, and how successful have we been?
Well, I know we have engaged with our folks internally in the county to try to make sure we're working with all those folks. As far as the sheriff, I'll let the sheriff comment to the extent he wants to on the other one. I think it's important to understand what we have right now is a draft ordinance. If there was a desire to move forward and have additional discussion on this, what would happen is the board would publish notice of that through our formal publication processes. There would be a public hearing. The board conducts the ordinances are different than a resolution because you have to publish in the newspaper, you have to hold a public hearing on it, then you have to have a second hearing in order to allow additional comment or revision of the ordinance. So we're sort of at the beginning stages of going through the public process. If this were to move forward, there would be a public noticed hearing at which there would be additional opportunity for public comment on the issue.
And what is the process for either us offering potential changes to this draft ordinance, like the 2448 or whatever else might be considered? What is the process for us to provide that input, and certainly the public?
I think essentially we just need to provide that to me, and then I can help put that out there, and we can get a revised draft prepared.
And Commissioners, you could direct us today to make the changes to the ordinance, to take out all or part, or not bring this forward at all, or bring only a portion of it forward, change the dates, change the times, all of those kind of things. So the reason for this work session is to make sure the public hears this discussion, your concerns, and how the changes might reflect those. And then that first reading, you might make additional changes based on public comment that you hear before you adopt it at second reading.
Thank you. Maybe one last for now.
Certainly, Commissioner.
Thanks. I seem to recall in the media hearing a story about the ACLU suing either the city of Boulder, I think it's the city of Boulder, maybe the county, but suing them based on their camping ordinance. Did I hear that correctly? Do you guys know anything about that?
Recently?
I thought so. No? Maybe not. Maybe that was in one of my dreams.
I'm not familiar with Boulder. I'm missing the name of the city. In Oregon is the last Supreme Court decision.
I know,
is-
yes.
But I don't know about Boulder.
Yeah, I'm not aware of the Boulder one. There was, I know, one in Fort Collins years ago, but that was prior to this Grants Pass decision.
Grants Pass.
Okay, I'll stop from there.
Commissioner Stevens, do you have other comments, questions?
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to preface this by saying, I know the culture that you're creating, and I know that the deputies have compassion, so I know that you are thinking about this a lot, and so I do appreciate, that you have that culture in your organization, and that you hire people that have those kind of values, that they want to help people and not want to, start by penalizing folks. So I do hear you, and I do experience that on a daily basis, so I appreciate all of you very much. One of the questions I have is around, like, have you talked to other police departments, local police departments, to see, like, how it's going? So I don't know how long, I can't remember how long the other communities have had that kind of ordinance in place. And, I mean, are they finding a lot of people still? I mean, what does the environment seem to be in that?
So, and I think you can, even though the ordinances are very, very similar across our region, and that's one of the things that we're attempting in this, because it's kind of like the fire restrictions we talk about. It's a patchwork quilt, and is it here and right across the street, it could be something different. And so the consistency for folks and that messaging is important. The way it's enforced, though, is varies greatly, and I think you can see that within our community, from a lot of outreach teams, a lot of different things, to nope, we're gonna, it seems right, do this. Oftentimes what happens is we play ping pong with people's lives, and that's not really fair to them either. It's because here there's some tolerance, over there's not a lot of tolerance, and so here there are no rules, and so we're gonna go to where there's no rules, but you're further away from resources, and so then we start pushing people back and forth, and that's unfair in a way as well. And this is morphed as I think we all anticipated it would, a conversation into homelessness. It is a tough social dynamic to answer that we are not. If we answer this at this table today, then we're all going to be Nobel Prize winners. We're not going to police our way out of homelessness, nor should we police our way out of homelessness, is my personal philosophy. There is a component for law enforcement, but not that we are not the answer to that. So I say this to answer your question. There's always going to be homelessness. Some folks are going to be receptive to resources. Hopefully it's temporary and we can move folks into stable housing. Some folks are going to be, nope, leave us alone. I mean, there's probably homeless folks who have an encampment up somewhere on the Forest Service land that have been there for years that we just don't know about, and they're doing whatever they need to do to survive. So does it go well? If going well is getting rid of homeless in your community, then I'm going to say probably not, because I think homelessness and those tough financial situations exist in every community in our nation.
Thank you, yeah. And I mean, I think that, obviously, for me, having the ability to be able to approach people and offer resources is really important. And there are sometimes children living in these situations too, where, to me, as a provider of human services, and just as, a good organization, we need to intervene when there's a situation where a child could be at risk, or an older adult, or whatever kind of situation we're talking about. So, I want you to have the ability to approach people and to be able to offer those resources. That piece is really important, I think, too. Some of the stickiness I have around the fines is, there again, like, I just don't want people to feel like that feeling of desperation when you can't dig out of a financial situation that you have. it can feel really overwhelming to folks that already have a lot on their plate. So, I don't know, I'm just talking aloud, trying to think it through, what would be best in that space. But I know that wouldn't be your first inclination is like, you've been here 24 hours, here's your ticket kind of thing. So, yeah, just, trying to work that out in my own head. And I think, as we move through the process and if we decide to move forward, which I do think we need to move forward with some of this, I think the public hearings will be really helpful in sort of hearing what the public thinks about this. I would say, if we're giving any direction, I would be inclined to more than 24 hours, I think 48 or 72 hours feels more reasonable to me, so, but thank you.
I would like to, my turn to
Yeah.
because this is important to me too.
Yeah,
to get-
absolutely.
What I hear and what I had said earlier, I've seen your deputies have really big hearts and I know they do a lot for helping those who are in bad situations. I wouldn't say that, challenging situations where, their car might be their last resort for some, at least some kind of housing. And I have seen these, as I mentioned, stories before, dropping my kids off at 5 a.m. at school for practice, and those cars are there and then they're gone. And so that I know lots, we all know lots of stories. So what I hear when we first started discussing this was just to give you more tools in the toolbox, because as you started this in the beginning, was when you show up and you say, is this your vehicle? And then it stops right there. You can't even continue a conversation about resources or other things. So this, I think, first and foremost, was maybe this opportunity to have further conversation, offer resources, and try. We also have folks who, it's a public safety issue, a public health issue. Mm-hmm. Also, maybe we have other residents who this is in front of their house or in front of their business. So we're trying to balance all of those things, and so I really appreciate how you let off with that, because this is not addressing one thing. It's also addressing all these vehicles that are on a public right-of-way that are very, very close to, literally almost on the white line. I passed them yesterday morning and I thought, oh, there's 4 cars right there. And so if and when we go forward and we're doing this process and there's some information and we're tweaking our understanding, and I'm looking maybe at both of you, and I have never met an implementation that was perfect. Once you implement and you get things rolling, you might find something that needs to be tweaked or maybe understood more or expanded, maybe contracted. What is that mechanism, and would we give ourselves 6 months, or what would, and I'm also asking, maybe, I'm not saying for myself, but I'm wondering, is we all have some concerns, and this is something that we know we've been inching towards, and there's a lot of reasons for this discussion today. So what would that look like if we go down this path, or unless we make some other changes and we find we need to, for the safety of the deputies or the safety of the I don't know what that looks like. Who knows what this implementation? We're in a very uncertain, constantly changing world, so that's kind of my concerns.
Yep. So first, I want to thank. Right, because it's a fine balance between the cars that are living along the side of the road. There's a public health, public interest concern as well. Your public property, your public rights. The Big Thompson River is probably their human waste receptacle, right? So what does that look like as well? So balancing all of these public needs and giving them a good resource. I don't know. I'm not the expert in legislative construct. My guess would be, or my assumption, and I'm going to look to Frank a little bit, that if you wanted to implement a sunset clause in this, I know the legislature does this at times, where it says if it sunsets in a year, that it goes away. Okay, I'm getting a look like that's not a real thing. I've heard of some laws that have sunsetted without prior approval, but maybe I'm wrong. I will be quiet now. Let Frank talk. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I think if you wanted to, I think you could adopt it for a certain period of time. But, you know, it's important to understand the difference between, like, a resolution. The board can just do a resolution essentially on 24 hours notice. This is an ordinance, and ordinances are harder to adopt. They take longer. There's more public process involved. But we amend ordinances regularly. We amend ordinances on a pretty regular basis. It takes longer. You have to have a 30-day notice period. You have to then publish it in the newspaper and go through this process. But you could do that anytime you wanted. So within 2 to 3 months, you could amend it anytime that you wanted to.
I'm wondering if it's reasonable to maybe come back and talk again 6 months after whatever is adopted. You can talk about what you're hearing, the sheriff can talk about what they're experiencing, and then you can look at the ordinance and see, does it need to be tweaked in any way? And then we can start that process. This is a local law that you all create and you all can amend.
And that was the reason for my question. I was going to suggest 6 months, so thank you, Lorinda. Because I was, and I do know ordinances, I mostly ask this for the public to hear that, that's the reason for my question. For folks to see this isn't like carved into granite, we can maybe, as we try this on, and we see how it works, we can, I was hoping we would say maybe 6 months, but there might be something sooner. So I understand how it's a public process, and that's why we do it this way, is because this has impacts, and we want to make sure that we have it in the right spot. So I appreciate both of you and the question. So I would like to see something when we come back in 6 months. Commissioner Gonzalez, I see your hand.
Yes. So I agree with, I think, Commissioner Stevens, we need to move forward in this process. I would, to the county manager's suggestion, I would recommend we change, I think it's in section 4, subsection 1, we change the 24 hours to 48 hours. Assuming my colleagues agree. Also, there's a typo in section 2, subsection 2. The word means is twice, so you might want to take a look at that. But the more substantive thing is the 24 hours to 48. And also, I would welcome input from the community about, and also if you could do a little research, Frank, how do we address the jail thing? I'm just concerned that if folks don't have the means, I don't think we want to put them in the county jail. So if there's input from the community, best practices, that would be helpful. And I don't know, Lorinda, how that, if we're asking for input, how we would receive that. Would it be through our Office of Housing Stability? But I would welcome input from the community about how we might address that particular aspect of this complex issue.
I think we can receive those, I can receive those directly, housing stability. You will likely get some directly, and so will the sheriff. And I think if we work to compile those into really good feedback ahead of the first reading of the ordinance, you all will have some information about that. I suspect different people will approach different of us in various ways.
So then, moving forward, the next step would be to make some revisions that have been recommended, get input from the community, and then schedule a first reading of this. Would that be within 30 days? Is that correct?
Yeah, whether it's within 30 days, we can do it. Once you do it, you have to wait 30 days after you have the first hearing. But, so we can schedule it, really, the first reading we can sort of schedule anytime you'd like. Or we publish it and then we have the hearing, yeah.
Right. So I hope that's clear in terms of a path forward.
I saw heads nodding on the 48-hour change.
Before I make those choices, I'd like to hear, I'd like to get a whole bunch of ideas forward. instead of just, I want to think about that one. I'm not sure if it's 48 or 72 or what it is. I'd like to, I mean, today, I need some thoughts on that myself, but I can see I might be overruled, but I don't want to react to today. I wanted to see how the conversation went. And I understand the rush to get this rolling, but I know there's a move to have this hearing, and I think we might get some other feedback, and I'd like to listen to some from the community and others to making some of those ideas or suggestions.
Isn't that the purpose of the public hearing for the first reading? If we decide we want to make some changes, I mean, I thought the idea was to make some recommendations, make some changes to the proposed draft of the ordinance, and then during first reading, isn't that when we would have a conversation about whether 24 hours, 48 hours, 200 hours is the best thing? And we haven't been rushing this. We've been working on this for the last 3 years. And I think it's time that we just make a decision that strikes a balance between the compassion that is necessary and the fact that, property owners, homeowners are impacted, businesses are impacted, and we need to find that balance. That's my opinion.
I appreciate that, Commissioner. I'm just going to have us all take our hands. I'm going to comment on that in a second. Commissioner Stevens, I don't know, you've nodded your head, but I would like maybe, we have had conversations about this, but after this discussion today and what was in the ordinance, because this wasn't brought up before, I'd just like to have a little more time to think about that and get some feedback from the community and stuff before. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, that's presuming that the community, there's community here, certainly, and we appreciate y'all being here. So, I mean, if that looks like the people in the room and maybe the people that they're affiliated with want to send emails in and kind of weigh in, I don't think that's a bad idea before we, decide on whether what kind, 48 to 72 hours or any other discussions that we've had today. So, maybe we can come back and revisit this and before we, get that. I mean, it doesn't have to be, we can say, we can just say it in the room. We're, taking comment for the next week on this and then come back and then give some guidance and start the process. There will be another opportunity for people to formally give public comment then if we push an ordinance forward. So I'm fine with waiting a week to make a decision on, some of the finer details.
Thank you. And yes, there is public here, but this is a work session. Public comment's not allowed. And so I wanted to be able to have some of those emails or some feedback, and also some feedback from our attorneys and from the sheriff's office on that. And so I would like to just maybe give it a few days and I need to marinate on this a little bit more, so.
Madam Chair,
How will the public get a copy of this draft? How will they know what to read? Because typically people like to react to an actual draft, and I suggested a couple of changes. Certainly the typo, I think we can agree on that. But how will the public, because I don't think this is a public document, it's a work product, so how will they see it?
Once I get all that together, we can put that out in the public somehow. I mean, I can work with Lorinda and the staff to get that publicly out there. It would be a public document anyway. I mean, it's a ongoing legislative process, and so what we have now is just sort of a working draft, which is what we'll be operating off of. I'm sure there's a way we can get it on the internet, although I'm not great on the internet, so I'd have to have somebody help me to put it up on the website somewhere.
Matt,
Yes, I would like to give the sheriff a chance to respond.
just real quick, 'cause I know our time is waning. Earlier, there was something else I would like the community as well as the Board of County Commissioners to consider is the fine structure. There was an initial discussion about the maximum is $100, but it's up to the sheriff's office how we do that. I would prefer that not be the case. Our discretion, and peace officers are allowed a lot of discretion in our society. Our discretion is how we approach people, how we implement that. But it's like, our discretion is whether we cite you for speeding or not. Our discretion is not, I'm going to charge you $50 for speeding, you $75, and you $125. So I would appreciate that you set the fine structure, whatever that is, but that's very clearly alliterated within the body of and leave the discretion on how we enforce that, and when we enforce that.
Another reason for us just to take a breath and think about this a little bit further. So, we're out of time, and we have an executive session right after this. And so I want to go ahead and thank the public for being here, for all of you for being here. We have a lot of staff here, and I'm sure we're going to have further discussions. We appreciate you all being here. We didn't get a chance to, I know you were here for call a friend, maybe, some questions.
Moral support for the sheriff.
Yeah, but I just thought maybe, sure, if you'd like to just mention, introduce a couple of your colleagues since they've been up here.
Certainly. Sergeant Sam Roth is our traffic unit sergeant, manages our fleet as well, and his Lieutenant Marilla Tatunzdik. They've been instrumental in multiple email chains back and forth about the creation of this draft and the issues that we face in the community that brought us here in the first place. So
And
thank
we
you.
want to thank you for your work in supporting the sheriff. Thank you all, and Sheriff and Frank, appreciate all your time. And
Yes, just
Lorena,
one more
yes.
thing. Why don't we add this to today's agenda? So if anyone wants to find it, they just go to the commissioner's webpage, they go to meetings and they find today's meeting notice, and we'll try to get it posted before the end of the day. That way it's all in one place and it makes sense to folks.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So 11:02, we are adjourned. Thank you for joining us today.